Alright guys, we are carrying on with this episode. I'm going to start some of the creases on the face, but before I do that I wanted to do a couple of the parts of the legs with some of the deeper undertones, and then I'm just going to set them aside until they can bake. These ones just aren't, I should have probably done them in the last video but I didn't, so I'm going to catch this up now. I'm going to do a yellow model just inside the thighs, and it doesn't take much. It's just there to add a little bit more of the buildup of the color in this area. This little area is a lot, I don't know, it just seems to have more color on any given kit, or on any given human rather. So we're going to do a little bit of modeling. And then the arms, down the inside of the arms. Blend it out at the edges. Our little ones are becoming very, very real and lifelike looking, and I'm really pleased with how they're turning out. I can't wait until we can get through this layer, and then you'll see them even more look alive. My words are kind of fumbling today, pardon my English. It's not very Englished today. All right. Alright, so we're going to set the limbs aside and let them dry, and then again I'm going to pull out the heads. And work on these some more. So with this color I'm going to use for my creases and stuff, I'm going to pull out my thick purpley red color that I used for their hands and their feet once before. The lid is where I'm going to focus on my energies this time. I'm going to use my blending sponge brush and pull some of this liquid out onto the lid, and then set the jar aside for a little bit. It looks absurdly thick when you look at it like this, but I promise it blends in nicely. Alright, so now I'm going to come in with my tiny little brush and come over these details one more time. And I don't really want to blend this out, I just want to make sure that there's no excess paint and pooling, and that just creates so much depth in the eyelid, like it could open at any moment. Now there's some little tiny lines on the top of the eyelid. Now this little corner right here is looking kind of naked, like there's not any paint in it. You can see a lot of blue, but there's not a whole lot of paint in there. So I'm going to add a little bit of this purple color and gently blend that into that corner, and almost make it look like it's got a little bit of a raspberry forming, or a little bit of a birthmark. Alright, I'm going to do a little bit of a line. You have to be careful which of these creases you emphasize, because some of them, the darker they get, it makes the baby look really grumpy. So I want just shallow emphasis on some of these just to give it shape. Pardon me, you're kind of seeing it upside down, but I guess I should try to flip it around so you could see. Alright, now I'm going to go back to these little tiny lips. And it's going to be the same process as the original underlayer. I'm going to outline it. And then I'm going to very carefully tap it and kind of pull it down towards the top of the lip. Smearing very carefully so it's not a very sharp edge. And that edge looked like it smeared a little bit too much, and I don't want that, so I'm going to try to take off that extra smeary bit. Easy does it on the lips. If your hands are shaky, you've got to try to find a way to steady them or steady the kit. I use my pinky and I balance my paintbrush with the use of my pinky. Cute little puckery lips. Very sweet little thing. And then again through the middle. I managed to pick up a hair on my paintbrush. Get that off. And on the top lip, I'm going to avoid that little middle bit so it stays as pale as possible. And that creates the depth and the shallowness of that spot where it looks like it's kind of a milk blister. Alright, then we're going to go back up the nose. I'm going to get my long paintbrush for this one. Try not to pull it out of the nose because then it'll smear all over the tip of the nose. That's bad juju. I think it makes it look like a runny nose and a sick baby. Alright, so this paintbrush, before I dip it in any more paint, I'm just going to use whatever paint is actually currently on it because I've already used it to blush a few things. And I'm going to kind of pull off or blush the flanges and see if I can get any extra paint onto the nasal flanges without adding actual paint. If I added it with a wet sponge, it would actually add too much. So that just is adding just enough to create some color on the flanges. Alright, so back to my wet jar. I'm going to take some of the wet paint. I'm going to actually add to this because I don't want it to be on her face too thick. And I'm going to give her some cheeks and some blushing by giving her kind of a triangle-shaped mark just on her cheek. Or his. This is going to be a little boy when it's done. His cheek. And then I'm going to use my soft sponge and gently blend that in and create a little bit of a blushed cheek. And then we're going to repeat on this side. And there's a little bit of pink left on my sponge, so I'm going to come back with that and touch the chin, touch the tip of the nose, and then touch the eyes, the eyebrows. And that already gave her a fair bit of depth on her face with those additions. Okay, now I'm going to come back in my wet jar of paint with my tiny brush. And again, this has to be really, really wet with not a lot of color in it, or it's going to look like giant scratches. The wettest, least amount of color. And then kind of wipe off the excess drippage. And then I'm going to come in on her face and do some itty bitty microscopic veins across her eyelid. This is on the verge of almost too big. My brush is still a little bit wet. And this kind of goes for a long time. This paintbrush just paints and paints and paints. You just connect these up with some of these blue ones that are up in here. I'm going to go over the top of some of these blue ones with the pink and add a lot more fine little spidery veins. These will sink in a few minutes, so you will only see faint lines of them. It just adds a little more depth to the baby's face. And again on this side. If you do this with a too big of a brush, it really muddies things up and it makes it look gunky. So make sure your brush is very finely tipped. And then I'm going to come in a minute with around her ears and give her some blushing there, but I'm going to do her eyelids a little bit more. These ones disappeared almost entirely and I want them to stick out a little bit more. So that one's just a bit dark. So now I'm going to gently touch that. This side pretty much disappeared altogether. I'm going to watch these until they dry, because they may disappear just like the last ones. The idea is that you have to just keep an eye on them until you know they actually stay where you put them. It's getting close. I think that might do it. I'm going to give her a couple little squigglies on her cheeks to represent the spider veins on her little tiny cheeks. Maybe one on her nose, really little and really faint. Okay, so now I'm going to turn my attention to her ear. I'm going back to the lid for the darker paint. And I'm going to touch way down deep inside of her ear and kind of use the tip of my brush to take the paint and fill it in those spots. And I'm going to gently blend that until it fills the area and smooths it out. I'm going to come back in with a little bit more and do this section. This area, you can see the raw vinyl underneath. So it may take a couple layers in this area to get it to a darker color without showing that raw exposed vinyl underneath. This layer is super important for you to really focus on every aspect of the doll. Turn it over, upside down, backwards, sideways, and look at every single piece and part from every angle so that you don't miss a spot. Nothing is worse than getting a doll to the new owner and then they send a message back saying you missed something or paint's missing or it looks terrible for some reason because you inadvertently missed having a ear check or a toe check or whatever the case may be. I don't want the whole ear to be red because that ruins the depth. The lighter areas is natural to have the kind of the highest areas kind of a paler color and the deeper spots more pink. Okay, so this little ear looks pretty good. When you have extra paint, take it to areas where you'll need the extra paint in just small quantities and rub it off on there. A little bit up here on the top of the ear. I'm not trying to like pull the paint out from these spots. I'm trying to smooth it in and create a blended area for it to transition from the unpainted area into the painted area. So painting with dolls is a little bit different than painting with any other medium. Okay, I'm going back to my thin paint now because I don't want these areas emphasized too much, but I do want them highlighted. That's too much paint. This shouldn't add a whole lot of depth there, but it's going to emphasize that little crease, the little worry lines that she's got, her little forehead crinkles going on. And again on this side. Alright, so this little one is darn close to done. I have a few more steps that I'm going to do. I'll put some milia across the nose and I'll do some more veining under here, but so I'll show you a tiny bit of that and then I'll do that off camera for everything else. It's all of these are kind of the same. You put it in a little bit thicker and then I use a wedge brush and do that same kind of a pushing motion to blend it into the crease while I'm pulling it through the crease itself. You make a few steps back and forth, flip it over and go from the opposite side, the opposite direction. And that creates a well-blended crease without having lines and smears and schmagma caking up in there. Alright, so I'm going to do a few things on this little baby now, so he's not forgotten. Compared to Maya, his little face is very two-dimensional. And I want the excess paint to go up over the eyelid and not down onto his cheek. He's already got what looks like a couple little birthmarks coming up on his eye over here. You can kind of see them. And this is kind of the nice thing about this painting techniques. You never get the same quirks on each kit. You can paint it 10 times, but each one always has little tiny variables that make it separate and unique. Itty bitty tiny nose. Okay, so when I call this tutorial a preemie skin tone, I'm not meaning that that's the size of the baby. I'm meaning that's the gestational look of the baby. Some of these kits that are little like this actually don't look anything like a preemie. and they would be painted like a toddler or like a newborn or whatever gestational age they appear to look. So this tutorial is meant to be a guide for painting a preemie gestational skin tone. I'm going to use the excess paint on my brush to try to get a little bit of color into these without emphasizing them too much. Alright, and then I'm going to come in on my lips. Whoa, that side got a little dark. Okay, since you saw that side go on a little dark, so I'm going to get rid of some of this paint before I have to blend it in and make it disappear on this face. Okay, and the little bottom lip. And you got to be careful on your lip color. If you're too red or too purple, then you can portray the look of like baby got into Granny's makeup drawer, and they would look just too absurdly pink. And these lips are on the verge of that, and that is most likely only because I haven't done the cheeks yet, and they look kind of like a negative on a picture. You see colors that are supposed to be less bright than the other colors, then it looks kind of funny. Alright, so we're now ready for some cheeks. Not a big face, so I'm not going to put much on. What you guys don't get to experience by watching this is the smells that is coming wafting up in our direction from our dogs below us. I'm glad you don't get to experience that part because they stink right now. Smelly beasts. Okay, so we're in a little bit in the ears. These ears are not quite as deep, and they're so tiny. You probably can't see me getting into these creases because I can't really hold the phone and the camera in the right direction. There's some spots in here that I can't quite get the paintbrush to touch. Again, across the top of the ear. And around the back. take my excess paint on my paintbrush and put it on this top spot and this lower little lobe right here. Alright. Now come to this side. The little guy that I'm making this little memory baby for, his name is Jackson. He was a twin. And he was the healthier twin. They were identical. And Mom said that they had issues and they had to take the babies early to try to give brother a chance at living. And little Jackson didn't make it, even though he was the healthier of the one. He had a pulmonary embolism, she said. Twin brother is, I think he just turned up 2. His name is Toby. And he's a pretty sick little guy. He has lots of issues afterwards. So Mom is really excited to see this little one come to life, and I'm excited for her to have him to hold on to. She's asked me, or I've asked her, I guess, or consented to do a little slideshow of him so that you can see the real baby Jackson. Okay, sorry about that. I got a phone call and right in the middle of discussing little Toby, and I didn't want to just leave it hanging. That was kind of insensitive and a bit rude. So while I finish doing some of the details on this little guy, I will finish that thought process before I forget what I'm saying. So I made a memory baby back in, I think, July, right before the Rose Doll show, and I didn't get her finished all the way before I had to go to the show. So when I got home, I was able to finish her. And when Mom got the baby, she posted pictures in a support group somewhere online, and because of that, I was able to get a few different clients coming to me, and one of them just happens to be Toby's mom and Jackson's mom, and she happens to live only an hour and a half north of me. So when I get to deliver this baby, we'll get an actual chance to meet, and she'll get to see the baby in real life and have a different presentation, and I'm hoping I'll be able to get to meet little Toby if he's healthy enough that day to meet up. So these memory babies are an important healing feature for many moms. Some moms can't handle it, and that's okay. Everybody's different, and they don't have to do it if they don't want to, if it's uncomfortable. But I've had several memory babies made this year, and I've gotten pretty good reviews from the moms about how they feel an ache that they didn't realize that they had, even though it was anywhere from a few months after baby to 18 years after baby. And they didn't even acknowledge or realize or remember that this ache was still there and still very palpable. And so their babies have been able to help them have something to cuddle on and to feel the pain, and to be able to ease that ache in their arms that they long to hold that baby. And we all know that they're not real, so we're not trying to pretend that they are real. It's just a therapeutic avenue of emotional release. And some people like them more than others, and then that's okay. So if some people want them, that's okay. So I have just a few clients each year that I do memory babies for, and I always try to make them look as much like the actual babies as I can. So I've studied these babies off camera, and sadly some of them, in the process of trying to keep them alive, they get pretty battered in the medical process. So I'm giving them a healthier skin tone, not something that would make Mom have post-traumatic stress issues where she has bad memories come up. Alright, so this little guy is just about ready. I'm going to go ahead and do some little yellow milia across his nose as well, but this step is done, and then I'll come back in the next video and do some details on the limbs.